Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And once again, we have a very interesting guest for us to uh, talk about where she comes from. And before I introduce our guest, I hope you're enjoying Future Fast. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I urge you to do look up. There are a lot of very interesting conversations ranging whole lot of topics. And there are a few conversations which contradict each other. And the whole idea of Future Fast is also that we bring different perspectives to the table so that people like you and me make our own informed decisions rather than be taken away by the popular narratives. And with that, if you're not yet subscribed to Future Fast, do it right now. And today we have Dr. Pratibha Singh. Pratibha, welcome to Future Fast and thank you so much for making time. And Dr. Pratibha is the co founder and heads discovery and innovation at Preview. And what Preview does, what she does, we'll hear it from her. Pratibha, welcome to Future Fast.
Thank you for having me here. I've been looking forward to this for a while now, and I'm
Wonderful.
glad we could do this.
So, Pratibha, can you please share your journey with our audience and listeners?
Sure. s- I'm a diplomatic brat, and we've kind of traveled a lot of places and everything. And part of it was getting to know people. Part of it was about getting to know what makes people tick. So maybe I wanted to get into psychology, but I got into biochemistry instead. And that was interesting in itself because this was getting to know how we work as humans, as systems, on a very different cellular molecular level. So I got my biochemistry bachelor's in biochemistry at Delhi University, and then went on to do a master's in biotechnology at university JNU. And then I think I started rolling around a bit, when for my PhD program. So I began in Delhi at National Institute of Immunology. I spent a year there, got accepted at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and I, spent 2.5 years there. And from there, I dropped out of that program. I joined University of Tokyo in Japan, and this time around, I actually found my fit, in terms of work, in terms of mentorship, and I think in terms of the work environment as well. And finally graduated with my PhD. Uh, by then, I had kind of decided because when I got admission at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and I joined there, I saw a lot of people that were in their fifth or sixth year of postdoc, right? And by now, a lot of people have gotten their first proper job after 10, 15 years. So the academic track is becoming longer and longer, and it's, with no end in sight. So when I graduated, by then my mind had already been made up that I would not be on the lab, the wet lab at least, and do something else around the ecosystem. Now, I did not know about the else part of it. Thankfully, that whole else has changed over the years. I graduated in 2008, came down to India, and I joined CSIR under. I was in the. I was at that point. It was called Technology Networking and Business Development
But
Division.
you
So,
didn't consider academic route as in to teach?
I actually never did. I've been told I teach well,
Okay.
uh, but somehow it never. I never really thought about it. And incidentally, my mom keeps bugging me about it. I qualified the NET exam in the first round. And her idea of that is that it's an employment exchange kind of a thing. You go register yourself sometime, and when a faculty position opens up, they'll call you. And it doesn't work that way. Um, but yeah, I've never really. I think what I saw my teachers do, the way they went about it, probably that was something that wasn't very encouraging or something that I did not want to take on personally. But yeah, with CSIR, there's a bit of it. It's like how projects get funded, what kind of decisions go into that, what kind of criteria are taken care of, how the progress is monitored. A
So
lot of,
on in at CSIR, you were in the administrative role, is
yes,
it not on
I
the research side?
yeah, so I was looking up. So there's a funding mechanism which started quite a bit. A lot of people in this ecosystem would be familiar with it. It's called NIMITLY. It's New Millennium Initiative for Technology Leadership of India, and it is the country's first funding mechanism that operates in a private-public partnership mode. So CSIR decides, its focus for a particular year. It starts inviting ideas, and then people both from academia as well as industry submit their ideas. The selected ideas are then finessed into an actual project, and participants from both industry and academia are put together so that they can work on it. And these are then funded in a very time bound, progress bound manner. So, like the progress is monitored internally as well as externally to see
So
how
fund released for
fund release
achieving of
over
certain milestones.
absolutely the deliverables that are achieved and all of that stuff. So that was quite interesting, for somebody who's in the science, in the at the lab, to come out of that and say, okay, fine, if the lab is getting a new instrument, what's going behind the entire decision making machinery to see, because as a student, at least when I when I when so as a student I never saw that. Nowadays when I go meet students, a lot of them are very savvy about this entire thing. They know they know the field application scientists, they know the account managers of these companies, they are in touch with them, they do a lot of buying and selling as well. Selling not really, but buying, in the sense that they are, they're very in touch with what's required in the lab, what's the pricing around going around and all of that stuff. So I think that's an education in itself. But yeah, so from CSIR, I also worked with another CSIR lab, which was more to do with S&T policy. So that was again a different avenue that I was exposed to, and that was interesting as well. So I think I am still kind of exploring the ecosystem around the science. So I then went on to work with Agilent Technologies, which is more a semiconductor space. It makes precision instruments for now it is a separate division by itself, genomics and diagnostics, and it talks about it works in um, instrumentation, precise instrumentation for the next generation sequencing space. So microarray and consumables for the next generation sequencing. So and then it allowed me to travel the country. I not traveled India as extensively. So and get to see different universities, the students there, the way the faculty interacted with their students, the kind of discussions they had, the kind of projects that they were in. So when you are doing your PhD, your focus is very narrow. You're getting to know more and more about less and less, essentially. But when you are dealing with, let's say, techniques and tools, right? And you see different people using them in so many different projects. I remember one project that sticks out. I was talking to somebody down south, and they were working on bacteria that divided unequally. Now, as students, we that when we start out learning biology, we know that the bacteria has two equal sized daughter cells. So I was like, okay, that is interesting that they divide into unequal daughter cells. But why would you want to study that? Right? And she was like, because a lot of us do study embryonic stem cell programming, right? How does we all begin as one cell, and how do we differentiate into so many different cells, with different functions and all of that stuff? So he's like, so her whole thing was studying this allows us to gather insights that we can then take from here and then transfer them here. So it was mind blowing. And it was not something that I would have learned by sitting in my own lab focusing on whatever that I would have otherwise focused on. I spoke to people working on jute and rice. I've always worked with human disease conditions. I've worked with human, cell lines, cancer cell lines, and all of that stuff. So rice is so different from that, right? So it allowed. So, and I think this is what still excites me about working in this space where I may not be doing the science, but I'm still connected with the science and I'm seeing how it is being used to answer so many questions and to address so many issues that we struggle with. Does that answer your question about my journey?
Uh, yes, I guess it kind of gives some indication of how you approach it. But can you share uh, you moved into a administrative function, and then you also moved into a research role, right?
Yeah, so I so maybe the administration function, right? This was a very small division with all PhDs as members, right? So it wasn't strictly administration because they were still looking at the research and they were looking at the fundamental questions being asked and if these were being answered appropriately enough. So it wasn't just moving a file from one place to another. It was still a lot of work that was, we might not be doing the research ourselves, but as my boss said, we were the underbelly of science. We were the guts and not the glory of it. We were
Okay.
enabling it to happen.
So then, how did this entrepreneurial journey start off? You founded a company, or you co-founded a venture. So how did that come about?
Entrepreneurial journey happened because I quit an organization which was quite prominent, and I got sick and tired of answering the why behind the quitting. And there's never a good answer for that. You can't say exactly what happened. You can't make stuff up because it's not convincing. A lot of people don't believe you. Um, and as one of my and so far my only client keeps telling me, I studied in Japan and US, so I'm no longer fit to work in the Indian system because I just don't know how the system works here. So for me,
Uh,
I had to like kind of do something on my own.
what do you mean system works differently, or you don't fit into it? How different, in your perspective, are the systems?
So I'll give you an example. See, I will say, if I tell you that I can't deal with political systems and let's say politics in a place, you can very justifiably tell me politics is everywhere, right? And it truly is everywhere. But the way it works here is very different from way it works anywhere else. In the US, you will not even see it. It's there. You know it's there, but it doesn't impact your day-to-day life in a big way. You can still function. In Japan, it truly doesn't impact you. At least when I was as a student, I could talk to the people. I mean, I could not talk to the people. We had our personal equations. Not having those personal equations also didn't hamper my work. I didn't even learn Japanese. I mean, I took conversational Japanese. But for the most part, my conversation happened in English in the lab. In fact, most of my lab members they alternated between English and Japanese for the works in progress meeting, and throughout, I uh, I presented in English. And my boss devised a very clear strategy to actually use it to his benefit. When my lab mates presented in English, he and I we used to sit down, make our notes, and then tell them that okay, fine, you should have maybe spoken this or that, because a lot of us literally translate from one language to another, and translations really don't are not as accurate. So you have to be idiomatically correct. You have to get that colloquial, the cultural context right from one to another. So you also kind of translate that. um so all of that was fine, but I would not say that I made friends there in but every time I needed something, I could just tell somebody that hey, I need this, and that was it. I just had to tell them once, and the next time it'll be sitting on my desk, and I don't have to have equations with these people to get my work done. And I was the only person in my lab on my project. When I joined the lab there were 6 people. When I left the lab there were 36 people, right? So the lab grew, but Chiefly, it was an organic chemistry lab. It was not really a biology lab, and I was the one who was doing biology in an organic chemistry lab. So a lot of things got ordered just for me. If something got ordered for the rest of the lab used it. I think even I used it. But if something got ordered for me, it was only I was using it. Nobody else had any other use for it. But the feeling there in Japan is, we as an organization go ahead and thrive if every one of our members thrives. Nobody's work should be left behind in any which way possible. So they made every effort for me to do my work properly. Here in India, I've never seen. Here, if you don't, likability is such a big thing, and likability is not definable, right?
Right.
You like a person, you don't like a person, the whole point is, I'm not chai. I can't be liked by everything. And even chai, everybody brews it differently. So there's no one definition of chai, right?
Right.
And here the likability gets, it's like, if people don't like you, they will start messing with your work. They will take your reagents, they'll leave your bottles open, they'll take your pipettes, and you leave the lab at 3 in the night, you leave a clean lab, you come back at 9 in the morning, the desk is all over the place because somebody's come and used it and and messed around with it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And that's a good reason to become an entrepreneur. But how did you go
it's
about
it's
starting
not
it?
it's not a good reason to become. So because when I was working, right?
You mean you just quit because of that and then the venture happened, or while you.
Sure. I'll tell you very frankly, when I quit, I immediately tried to venture on my own. And the way I went was the last person that I spoke to in the clinical space, because I was talking about a product which I kind of, it got launched in the US and it got introduced to the company. I'm not sure how much it got launched here in India right now. But I was the only one from my team who said, let me try and see if there's a market interest for it. So I kind of identified all the customers for it in the research and academia space, in the teaching hospitals. And I started talking to these people, and I actually, some of them actually bought some of it. So my thing is, can I do this? So that was my kind of, the test balloon going up. I quit when, the environment, when it got too much for me to take. And when I felt that, now my work is being butchered, already a lot of it is not being shown to the people, the productivity is not visible. That's a different story altogether. But now, because I mean, I don't, you could cut this out, but my country manager said to me, we don't fire people, we just make it uncomfortable for them to continue. They finally made me uncomfortable enough to continue. So I quit, right?
But
Um,
Pratibha, you're okay to have it online? I'm okay to carry it, but if you're okay to say it.
it's so much in the past, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, good. Okay,
You know,
that's
it's so
good.
much in the past. And I think
Right.
a lot of times, a lot of this bullshit continues because the people that suffer stay quiet,
Mm.
right? And like a lot of times there are these articles on LinkedIn that this happened, but nobody names, right? And then it just continues.
Right.
But if somebody starts naming, if people, there's at least a little bit of fear, this will get out, right? That bank video,
Mm.
it got out. I hope some bit of it stopped somewhere. I'm
Right.
hoping. I don't know what happened to the follow up and all of that stuff. But
Mm.
I'm not saying this to name people. I'm just saying that, there's a quote.
So obviously, because of this, you couldn't get any of your colleagues to come into your venture.
No, I would, and I don't want them. If I couldn't work with them,
Mm.
obviously, in fact, one of my ex-colleagues tanked one of my projects in my next venture also. That's a different story altogether.
Okay.
That's a level of toxicity that you don't want to get into.
All right.
But that has happened. Believe me, that has happened. And that's documented.
Okay.
So, yeah, which is why I said, some bridges need to be burned. So I'm never stepping back on them. I'm not burning the bridges, but I'm not stepping back on them.
Yeah, sounds too toxic to think of it. Yeah.
Very toxic.
But
It's
how did you go about attracting other co-founders then? Was it somebody you had worked with in the past or studied, or how?
no,
Where
no,
did
no.
they come from?
Actually, I think there's a whole thing about finding your tribe. Co-founders is like finding your tribe. You cannot be somebody else and attract somebody like you. You
But
have
how
to be.
did you do it? How do you go about it?
Every time somebody sends me a LinkedIn request, if I think I can, it's the profile looks fine. The guy's not going to be a creep and all of that stuff. I accept, and then I send them a message saying thank you for connecting. How may I help? And I'm not making this up. My co-founder actually said I want to do something business wise.
Are you saying in this venture or that Anavik?
Anuvik,
Anavik also you found online?
yes.
Okay. And
And
how long is that courting of sorts before you actually jump into starting a company?
see, Anuvik was a LLP. It was a partnership. It was just me and this person, and
No,
they
but
wrote.
before you started, how long would you deliberate, talk?
We had a couple of meetings. Okay, and the
Both
idea
from the
was.
same place?
Sorry, say that again.
Both from the same city, same place?
Yeah, we were both from the same city. We were both based
Okay.
out here in Delhi, so we were able to meet in person.
Hmm.
And so he sent me a message. We exchanged a couple of
So
emails.
just one step back. So you said you look up the profile, and so what are the criteria to be open to start a venture with somebody? I mean, since you've done it twice now, like that. So what would you put as a criteria to look up?
Okay, so I would look up what is it that they want to do. There has to be some alignment, right? Now, if somebody says they want to do something in IT, which I have absolutely no idea of, I can't contribute to that. So I have to. And I'm not. I don't know everything, but my thing is, what I know, can I use that? Can I learn something? And can we together do something that actually makes sense, and then people will buy it? So for the first venture for Anavik, I have a lot of technical skills. But let's put it that way. I was looking for somebody who was more techno commercial, and so we put a two-member team together because we I had an idea of because with that with my prior company we were doing selling essentially.
Sorry again. So you said he reached out to you or you reached out?
He reached out to me.
He reached out. So possibly he had an idea or thought
He
of
had an
starting something.
idea which I
But
kind of
how is it that you got started with your idea and not that idea?
because his idea I had some idea about the idea and I knew why it would not work.
Ah, okay, okay.
So
So,
when
oh, it was
I
coming from your space, so you knew
yeah,
you had a better understanding
exactly.
of it. Okay.
And art my idea was very simple. I'd already
But
identified.
how easy or difficult is it to convince somebody who came with their idea and asked you to join them to building it? How easy or difficult was it to convince them that you're good to work with, but your idea is bad. Let's work on my idea. How how was that? I mean, I've simplified it for the conversation, but how easy or difficult was it?
For me it was easy.
Well,
For me it was easy because I think I had the facts to tell him
see,
that
making the argument is perhaps easy, but making the acceptance and work together, was that also easy?
it was easy because I had an idea that it was a very low hanging fruit,
Okay.
right? It was something that they knew it would not happen immediately, but there was nothing rocket science about it. It could be done.
mm, mm,
Take time, but it could be done. It was doable. And I had all the pieces of the puzzle together. I just did not know how to put them together, because that's where the secret sauce of selling for me was missing. And he had it. So
mm,
I knew the technology, I knew the client, I knew the technology vendor. We just needed to buy it from the vendor and sell it to the customer and convince both of them to support us because we had no money.
mm,
And this was a big ticket item.
mm, mm.
So a there was money at the end of it, as opposed to his idea, which would have. So in this particular industry, this is a term that I came across, and it's an interesting concept. For low value products, you need high volumes, and for high value product, even your low value volumes will be fine.
Sure.
Um, for your low value products, you will have to have a lot of conversations, the same iterative conversations with a huge number of people, and for that you need to put in a lot of effort. You need to go identify these people, you need to go talk to these people. So essentially you're having that same conversation again and again and again and again, god knows how many times, as opposed to having that conversation just a few times,
Mm,
right? So it's more energy efficient, I would say. I think those are the things that kind of, you know, the idea that he wanted to work on was a low value, high volume product. And with just the two of us, we didn't have enough people to do it. And when you start hiring people, you need to start thinking about their salaries and all of that stuff. So initial
right.
investments were high.
So you managed to get your co-founder to agree on
for
your
a
idea.
non for a science person with zero commercial um, training or experience, I think I was able to convince a techno commercial person with the commercial aspects of the argument.
Mm, mm.
Let's just put it that way. I think the money part of it was more convincing than anything else.
Right, right. Okay. And what was the journey like? You spent a little over 7 years in that venture.
Yeah. So we started working in August of 2016. Prior to that, with that same customer, I'd been pitching the same technology from October of 2013. So yeah, I think a lot of this just happened. It just felt like, how did you do it? But eventually it worked out. Um, so it's the same customer, same technology, a certain period of time, and the original company had not reached out to him. So maybe he wanted the technology and all of that stuff. August 2016, my partner and I, we met up. We started talking about this and all of that stuff. So September 2016, I think I went and had the conversation with the client, and we lambasted me, first of all. You're the only one who comes and talks about this. Are you actually going to do something about it? When is this going to happen and all of that stuff? I'm like, if you're so on board, then let's actually make it happen. So that was essentially it. So from the word go, we knew this will happen. It was just a question of making it happen, sticking it out, and not giving up in the middle of it. There were a couple of times when we felt that, you know what, maybe we don't know what we're doing. Maybe it will not happen. But we still stuck with it. And in the end, that sale happened. Um, so yes, so we identified a client, we identified a technology, and we were able to do it. We were able to make the sale, we were able to make the installation, we were able to finish the training, and then COVID happened. And anything that was not COVID did move, essentially. So we did try to do something about COVID also, but by then, testing had become very competitive. So we pitched at a certain price. Somebody pitched at half that, and that got accepted. So that was that. And that's when we started to try and pivot into precision nutrition. Because while I was working with this particular clinical space in oncology, I was also reading up on nutrition. And I was coming up with more and more research on how the what we eat affects our bodies on a very molecular level to the extent of switching on and switching off certain genes, right? It's that specific. And so I wanted to see the impact of nutrition, on disease conditions. So we tried to pivot into that space. And since COVID has happened back in 2020, I've been with that idea: nutrition, gut microbiome, fermented foods, probiotics, prebiotics, symbiotics, and reading, doing a lot of fermenting, doing a lot of experimentation, trying some prebiotics on my own, see how I feel about it.
So all this was self-funded.
Yeah,
Okay.
all of this was self-funded.
Were you collaborating with any research institute or a lab for any
No,
support?
no. I
Okay.
tried to. A lot of times it doesn't happen,
Hmm.
because too many things get into place. We need this and we need that and all of that stuff. If as a person I can't put all of that together, then um, either I can wait. None of this is
So
going
how
to.
long before you could actually raise your first invoice then?
Okay, so August 2016 was when we started working. Our first invoice got raised before Diwali of 2018. I remember a couple of days before Diwali, we received the first tranche of our payment in our
That's a little after 2 years.
left.
So
But the funny thing is, having that SMS on my phone that, such and such amount has been deposited in your current account, it was a good thing. It was a good thing to show my family that, we're making money. But when I truly felt happy was the day when the technology, the instrument, that box, that actual box, was delivered to the hospital. It was unboxed and it was put in place. I can't describe to you, just how it just felt like my baby was, in its place, in its crib.
okay.
So I think that's where the equation with money comes in. Like that check was not making me happy, but this was.
But this is more like a techno commercial deal than a technical deal, right? I mean,
It is a techno commercial thing. Yeah.
so how did you see yourself transition not only just about thinking there is an opportunity, but go through that and put that in place? How did that change happen? I mean, what was that learning? Where was this that you
My
acquired?
boss, right? He said, "We are the glory. We are not the glory of science. We're the guts of science."
Okay.
You know, um, there is a certain thrill to doing science yourself. I'm not going to say no to it. You know, uh, I remember back in New York, my boss used to just walk up to my bench and say, "Surprise me," and I could show him results, and that happiness that he used to get. Good work. That was something. Um, Back in Tokyo, we had a tie-up with Otsuka Chemicals. We had a tie-up with Colgate Palmolive. We were working on quorum sensing, and we were identifying, these molecules that had that were affecting the quorum sensing in, let's say, cystic fibrosis. But we were also working on dental plaque. So, and research in Japan is done a little differently than in US, where you have tie-ups with your companies to begin with. So a lot of your projects are written with the company needs in mind. They fund the personnel salary, they fund the instrumentation and all of that stuff. They fund the lab also. So they have a very clear idea of the outcomes of a project and how those products are then going to be marketed and all of that stuff. So that the bench to bed pathways kind of cut down a little shorter. So the technology comes into use a little quicker. So there was a certain joy in that also, that okay, fine, my project, this molecule is now being used here. With this, being able to say, okay, fine, this test is being done for, let's say, breast cancer, and right now it's not available here in India, and the samples are being sent abroad. There's a certain time limit, there's a certain cost factor, and that cost factor decides the accessibility. So let's put it this way: ICMR figures from 2 3 years back, 1.77 lakh uh, new cancers being detected in breast cancer. In a year, only 300 tests being done. So the access gap, it's huge. Now,
Mm.
as opposed to that, if you're able to bring that same test here in India and be able to offer it for almost like one-sixth the pricing, you suddenly open up it a little more. That impact is different. You may not have your name on it, but you know you were instrumental in it in some way. Just
Right.
having that satisfaction is what works for me.
Mm. Mm. And how did this venture come about? Was it one of the uh, casualties of COVID?
Anuvik, yeah, Anuvik, I think I would say it is a casualty. I still have the domain. I'm still keeping the name alive. I have Insta accounts because I came up with the name Anuvik. So in a way, it is my baby.
Oh,
Um,
what does that mean?
Anuvik means molecular. It's Sanskrit for molecular.
Okay.
Your atom together is a molecule, right? So and everything that we look at, life isn't possible without our carbon dioxide or oxygen. Yes, oxygen, but water. We're all made up of these building blocks. The building blocks are molecular. They're not atomic. So life in its essence is molecular.
That's
So I'm
Anavik.
definitely
Okay.
keeping the domain, and I have plans for it now. So I will be putting content on it more, hopefully regularly. Um, I wouldn't call it dead. I just might revive it at some point in some form. So for me, it still exists in social media and in my mind. And let's see, I don't know about the future. I just might. So the partnership can't be changed. But let's
All
see. I mean, I can still play around with the name Anuvik in some way.
right. Right. But you mentioned early on that you originally wanted to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Yeah,
And
I still read.
what was that transition? I mean, what was the trigger otherwise that took you out of psychology to biotech? And
I think just it just worked out that way. Uh Bachelor's, maybe I didn't even think about studying it in a formal way. But I was always interested in what makes people think. And believe me, I am coming back to psychology. You have a question, so I there's a book that I'm reading, which is and I'm gonna butcher the name. It's by Dr. Gabor Mate, or I don't know how to pronounce the name, but the title of the book is "The Body Says No," and it essentially discusses how stress and how we cope with stress is instrumental in how healthy or unhealthy we are. And it's from what I've read so far, any autoimmune disorder of ours is directly linked to you know stress, anger, and do we have an outlet for our anger? So if we're really angry at somebody and we're not able to express it in some way, in a healthy way, then we're
so,
inviting trouble
so
for us.
today, after this journey, you are trying to connect your biotech and psychology back in.
Because it is,
Okay.
so the book mentions disciplines like psychoneuroimmunology.
Mhm.
And in our body, we have something called the HPA axis. So that's hypothalamus, pituitary, and the adrenals. Right. So you've heard of testosterone, you've heard of serotonin, you've heard of cortisol. The cortisol is what makes us. So people who are like really thin but have a paunch, those paunches are called stress bellies
Okay.
because they're so stressed out. Their cortisol levels are always so elevated that it's messing up everything else in their bodies. So in fact, I had this conversation right after I, finished my PhD. I came back to India and I was reconnecting with a friend of mine, and we were in a mall somewhere, and she just said, "Yeah, yeah, I have a little paunch." And This is a skinny person. She's taller than me and she's really skinny and she has that paunch. So I was like, yeah, my brother also mentioned you, you have a paunch. He's like, ha, pata nahi, I don't know what to do about it. I was like, are you experiencing too much stress at work? She's like, are you trying to change the topic? I said, no, I'm still on the topic. I just want to know if you're too stressed out and how are you, managing your stress levels. She's like, why are you asking about the stress? I'm like, because that's why you have the paunch. If you're not bulky anywhere else and just around the midriff, that's where it is. It's visceral fat and it's all stress. So
Interesting.
I'm not like force connecting all of this. I'm naturally coming back to it.
All right. But you are also interested in genomics and epigenetics. Is that
I
what
am.
association is from your current venture, or this interest has been always there?
So in New York, I was in an epigenetics lab. I worked on X chromosome inactivation and imprinted genes. So these are two mechanisms of epigenetics. And another lab mate of mine was looking at methylation. And methylation is right now being looked at from the uh, perspective of aging.
So can you just elaborate on that? Metal,
Epigenetics, so we are all familiar with genetics.
yeah.
Right? It's the DNA sequence that we're born with that we inherit from our parents. And barring minor changes and random mutations, a lot of it doesn't change. We die with that sequence, right? Epigenetics is above the genetics. It is controlling what gets expressed when, in what manner. And you get two copies of the same gene, from one from your mother, one from your father. It's your epigenetics that determine which copy, whether your mother's copy or your father's copy, will get
But
expressed.
how controllable are these? Because many a times these things uh, come into for over generations also, right? So how logical is this epigenetic argument?
It's see how does okay I my boss will kill me if I say something wrong. So I'm a little cautious of saying this right now because I'm just trying to choose my words carefully. Because he'd be sitting and if he ever watches, he'd be sitting and thinking I taught her better. Um, the methylation or the histone modification, right? These are like kind of putting ticks on something, and these ticks get inherited over generations. So let me put it this way: when my mother conceived me, right, all the eggs that I have in my body were formed at that point of time, right? So every time a woman conceives a daughter, there are three generations. Whatever this woman is experiencing in terms of nutrition, in terms of environmental stress, in terms of stress around her, is
So I
leaving
can
a
blame
mark.
it up to great grandmother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So that is what is my question. The relevance of epigenetics in this context.
Yes, it is. Which is why, when somebody conceives, you say you always are very careful that they're very happy. We
So
have these.
that should be the logical narrative of genetics, right? That it is genetics that behaves
It's
that
not.
way,
It's not just the gene sequence, no. It is the gene sequence is what is
or
there.
the controlled performance activation at a different point in time. But this
So
is
let's say you
organic,
have.
right? This is a natural process.
It's a natural process.
So, but isn't epigenetics is an effort to control it externally to
No, it's not. It's not. You can't. I think the reason for studying it is so that you can manipulate it externally.
right? So is that
Right. When recombinant engineering the discipline as it started, right? The goal was to create a human being with particular traits.
right?
I remember being in college and my HOD at that point of time selecting the topic for a debate as let's
Eugenics,
design,
right?
yeah, eugenics. Let's design the next Miss World in India.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then you have to have that information, one gene, one trait, right? This is the behavior. This is the color of the skin. This is
So
the hair.
that's how you use epigenetics to go deeper into, at least in one gender, it is mappable. But is there anything similar to it in the male gender as well?
Yes,
Oh,
apparently.
there is?
So there is.
Oh, what is that? I'm just curious.
I read about it in the context of fertility. I will have to look it up, quite
Okay.
on.
Okay. But there is something about.
Yes, there is. So epigenetics
Okay.
is being looked at in terms
Oh,
in view of the fertility issues, that are cropping up.
oh, okay.
And stress is a major factor there too.
Okay. Right. But that is associated with epigenetics, you're saying? No connection, right? Yeah?
Stress, yes.
How is that?
See, I'll tell you how you react to stress and your gut microbiome. See,
How I react to my present situation? How can my grandfather be responsible for it?
your grandfather may not be, but your future generations could be, right?
Okay, my how I
Looking
think and create the
backwards.
stress, I can make it difficult for them.
Yeah.
So, but it's the same thing you're saying. So, effectively, my grandfather, or so they can pass on the stress through the gene, you're saying,
No, they're not passing on the stress. They're
or the
passing on the
relation to
stress
it.
response.
Okay, okay.
Wow. We're gonna have to read about this a bit more.
Yeah, this is okay. Okay, right.
But I'll
Interesting.
tell
Let's.
you why. Because the thing is, the way we perceive it, it's not just in the mind, right? It's also signaling. See, when you get stressed out, immediately your body responds to it. You feel it in your gut as well,
Hmm, hmm,
right? Now, that's not just a feeling, that's actual signaling happening.
okay.
And that signaling is then more in terms of molecules and hormones and downstream cascades and proteins and genes being activated, proteins being expressed, and all of that,
Hmm, hmm.
right?
So,
Some of
how would you?
it could be momentary, some of it could be generations.
Okay,
So that
okay.
is still, it's still, it's so, in science nobody will say this is what it definitely is. They'll tell you this is what we've studied in this particular case, in this particular controlled environment. The rest of it we don't know.
Right.
So that joke about a tree fell in the forest, and if nobody heard it, did it make a sound? A scientist will say we've established it for Douglas fir, but for the rest of it we still don't know.
Hmm, right. Okay. So, Pratibha, I'm just curious, how would you define your function to be are you a entrepreneur, researcher, or somebody who uh, develops products, innovator? How would you define yourself?
But the developing product is out, because right
Hmm.
now I'm not making anything that I'm thinking of marketing.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's for now.
Hmm.
Uh, Other than that, I would put myself as a learner first,
Hmm.
and I'm able to make connections. But I then try and see, okay, then which one is the feasible um, or a relevant or something. I can make any amount of connections, but which one makes sense to me?
Hmm.
And when I communicate to the other persons, other people, which ones make sense for them? And can something be made out of them which benefits them as well? But I'll
Hmm.
try it
Hmm.
myself first.
Hmm.
So
So that's your entrepreneurial streak or the business person in you to be able to connect to find something relevant to work with. And
right now
you
also I'm looking at
and
people
you
who
said
are
you
making
come
products.
from a bureaucratic family, right? I mean,
Yes.
so it's not that. business.
No.
Uh, okay.
In fact, I think we are a family of outliers. My parents are from UP. Nobody from UP moves out of UP. At least for a long time they didn't. Now we are beginning to see more people out, from UP in different states in India. But till a really long time, every time my mom met somebody from UP, she'd be like, "Oh my God, my long lost brother" types. So, so I think we were one of the very few people who were out of UP. So my dad was part of the diplomatic services, and we were like out in the world.
Hmm.
So I remember being part of this blogging community that I mentioned first,
But
and
that
I
was not
was,
a motivation for you to get into probably diplomatic services. Usually they do that, right? Traditionally,
yeah,
at least
usually
in
they
this,
do that, but the path to that is through the UPSC. Never even took the exam, quite honestly.
I mean, yeah, I mean, isn't it unusual for a person coming in that family?
But I definitely tried.
Okay.
But for me, I think by the time my perception of these services changed, it was a little too late for me to really apply. But it's only when I started working with CSIR that, to an extent, uh, my thought process about what
But that was after your PhD.
after my PhD.
That was a long way, right?
And also, a lot of things have changed in the recent few years.
Mm,
Earlier opportunities, the work, the way things were, you only just pushing files, right? You didn't see that, there was so much more to it beyond the pushing files. There was so much more that you were achieving, and you don't have the visibility of that, right? And nowadays I see a lot of people getting educational opportunities from their civil services. They're going to places like LSE and INSEAD, and they're
mm,
coming back
mm,
with education from there, and they're doing so much more here.
right.
But earlier we didn't have a visibility of all.
Okay. No, but
So I
you
think,
also traveled around a lot, right? Because of that.
yeah,
So
we
that
traveled
does.
around a lot. But the thing is, because of the traveling, I was also the new kid in the school every 3 years. And every 3 years, I was back in India. And every 3 years, my accent was being questioned, and I was getting a rough time because of that. Um, so it makes you feel, and it makes you wonder if you can put down roots anywhere.
Mm, mm,
And you want to explore that also. You don't want to like be moving around every 3 years.
all right. So,
And I
who are
think
the people who have influenced you in the kind of person that you become?
my mom a lot. We've had you know, our own circle, where, we've hated each other's guts. We're now friends. There's a certain amount of care in the equation now. Um, I do see sometimes roles being reversed when I have to be the disciplinarian and say, no, you're not doing that. So I think we've come that. And I've seen her show up in ways that I find very inspiring. Definitely her cliched person, Dr. Watson. Back when I was in the master's program at JNU, he came to India. He actually visited JNU. So myself and a few of my classmates, we were able to get a picture with him. Um, he was taking questions. So I, again, asked the very hackneyed question of nature versus nurture. But the way he answered it, you know, that made a difference. That kind of inspires you to do something. It's actually contribute. And of course, he's what he did. Okay, there are stories about Rosalind Franklin and all of that. So, but his contribution is still important. Nothing takes away from that. Um, so having met him, being able to interact with somebody of that stature actually doesn't consider your question stupid. You know, answers it with kindness and with information. makes you feel seen. I think that makes an impact.
mm,
So, yeah. These days, I think my nephews, because as adults, we buy into a lot of agreements on a subconscious level, right? We follow rules, and I don't remember specifically being asked to follow a rule, but we do, right? And then you see kids, they don't follow any rules, but they have such strong sense of boundary, and they will try and rediscover things their own way, and they have a voice and they do use it. So, watching these boys in my family and learning from them, has been, it's like, because I think over the last few years, I've been more into that learning, relearning, unlearning kind of a process. And watching them allows me to unlearn a lot of my adult behaviors that, this is wrong. It's not serving me. Maybe I should follow this kid. And short of throwing a tantrum, I think I'm trying to, like, put more sturdier boundaries around this.
mm. And so usually I ask all my guests in the last of the journey part of the podcast is, can you recommend books, the podcast to our listeners?
Guy Kawasaki, remarkable people, because he talks to these people from different walks of life, and their journeys. And I would love to meet him at one point of time. I've read his LinkedIn profile, and the way he's done these things. He was at Stanford. He's worked with Apple, and but he's like, oh yeah, that happened. He's not making it into such hyped things, right? And the way he talks to people, he's read their books. He's taken the time to understand them. He's gotten very meaningful questions, and he actually takes the time to listen to their answers. And it's all being done when you listen to him. It feels like you have your eyes closed, you're sitting in his you're sitting in his living room, there's a fire on, and it's a very warm and cozy kind of a conversation. uh, but it is very meaningful. You each of his podcasts, you end up learning something from those. um, Another podcast that I listen to is Steve Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, because he is in this whole journey of nutrition, of exercise, of understanding the body's physiology, um, and business. He's again an entrepreneur, right? So he's setting up his own things. Sometimes he does plugs products and all of that stuff, but all of it is done in a very non-cringy, non-commercial, non-put offish manner. It's like, this is a product that I used, I found value for it, and if you feel like using it, has a discount. Andrew Huberman, again, you know, um, that's more to do with neurobiology, optics. So he talks a lot about the our brain, the circadian rhythm, again healthy lifestyle changes and all of that. Peter Attia, Tim Spector. Tim Spector is all about nutrition, gut microbiome. So these podcasts, and I've come across all of these people, or let's say all of these people invite each other. So you listen to one podcast, you get to know about another person. You start listening to their podcast, you get to know more about more people, and you end
Uh,
up picking their books up, right? Peter Attia, Gaber Mate's book I picked up exactly like this. So I am in the space where I'm listening to a lot of these informative podcasts, picking up books, reading, and they have YouTube longer session videos as well. So going through that. So yeah, these are the people that I would recommend. Here in India, I think recently the Kamath brothers have started a podcast. Shashank Mehta from The Whole Truth has started a podcast. That's again, all about food, clean eating, and clean labels. And he's again, I think he's recently started his Truth GPT, which is again built on the podcast and the material that they put out as the blog post. Um, who else? So yeah, among the Indian podcasters, I would say, and then I think from Brain Matters, or there's another podcast called The Other Side, which is talking to a lot of people who've started their health journeys a little late in their lives.
Hmm.
So these are people in their 40s, in their 50s, and they're looking crazily healthy. So I'm kind of like then following them and saying, okay, fine, what is it that they are doing right? Right? Because it's a very different body language. It's a very different kind of confidence. The way they're carrying themselves, the way they speak is very different from the younger people, the muscled people that you see, right? That's a different kind of confidence.
Correct.
And I kind of, I see this, and it's very inspirational. It's very aspirational also.
Yeah, very interesting recommendation. Okay.
So yeah,
Right.
these are people I would recommend.
Wonderful. Thank you. And to the audience and listeners, I hope you've been enjoying this conversation, and do come back soon, because we're going to talk about what she's doing and what are the challenges she sees in that industry, and there'll be more towards that. And please do share this conversation with all those you think will appreciate it. And if you have not yet subscribed to Future Fast, do it right now. And once again, thank you so much, Pratibha, for making time to share your journey across, and also being badgered with in between questions. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me. Actually, I mean, I think every time I have a conversation, there is something new I learn, and sometimes I get some insights about my own thought process. So I find that interesting. So thank
That's
you for
nice.
that opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you.